Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I was out of town a couple days last week, and while I was gone, a bunch of people sent me this story, and I thought, whoa, I got to do that one. Administrators suspended after selling school districts lawnmowers on Facebook Marketplace. There's a lot going on there. It's actually not too lengthy of a story, but there's just enough there to make it interesting. Noelle Haynes and Emily Van Der Riet wrote this for WOIO out of Ohio. A school administrator in Ohio was suspended after selling the school district's lawnmowers on Facebook Marketplace. Pretty much everything is wrong with that sentence. Akron Public Schools employee is accused of selling 11 lawnmowers owned by the school district on Facebook Marketplace without the board's approval. Now, we don't know what exact title he has. We know he's probably not the superintendent, but he was reportedly selling them so that they could buy new lawnmowers for the district. That's what he said. But the school board suspended him at its most recent meeting. The school board, under recommendation from the superintendent, said it is considering firing him because he violated the staff's code of ethics. He was suspended without pay while the board considers his firing. So he is a school administrator, clearly not the superintendent, probably not a board member, but what the title is beyond that, we don't know. Full disclosure, I've got to let you know that my father for many years was a school administrator. And so I've mentioned before, I've got a lot of educators in my family. My mother and my father both taught. My grandmother and my grandfather both taught. In fact, my grandmother and my grandfather met at school where they're both teaching. And my mom and dad met at that same school where their parents met. And that's where my parents met. And I also taught. So a lot of teachers in my family, and like I said, my dad was also, he taught, but he's also a school administrator. So I know a bit about some of these kinds of things. But first of all, anybody selling anything on Facebook Marketplace, the stories I hear and the things I see lead me to believe that it's almost like what I'd call a trap for the stupid. I'm not sure if anybody ever successfully sells something on Facebook Marketplace and has a transaction go smoothly. I hear nothing but stories of things that aren't real being sold or scams, or people try to post stuff and they get nothing but, is it still for sale? Hey, is it still for sale? But he's apparently managed to sell, according to him, 11 lawnmowers. 11 lawnmowers, and we don't know if he sold them as a batch or one at a time. But he says he was selling them so he could buy new ones. And the question is this his job? So if you get a job someplace as an administrator, that means that you're in charge of certain things and you're told these are your duties and responsibilities. Take care of this. Is the fleet of lawnmowers owned by the school district under his command? And the question is it? Because if it is, presumably a school district's going to have a process whereby they acquire things and dispose of things. And most government entities, and a school district would be a government entity on some level, that entity would have rules for disposing of things and acquiring things. And so they can't just have a guy go out and go, I'm going to buy a bunch of new stuff for the school. I remember my father telling me very, very interesting stories about when they needed to buy school buses, and the whole process they had to go through. And because my dad's a car guy, somehow he always managed to wangle a couple of free drives in there. He'd say, well, before we start looking at bids, can you guys bring some out and let us drive them around a bit? No, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm not sure how much of that was just his desire to drive a school bus versus, being able to give some feedback on. I'm not sure the way that one handled in the corners was appropriate, but they're going to have a system whereas we take the stuff we're getting rid of and probably sell it at auction. Or, if we're going to buy a bunch of stuff, we've got to get competitive bids and so on. And so the idea that he's just doing this on his own really does make you wonder if he knows the rules. If he doesn't know them, that's a problem. And if he knows them and he broke them, that's also a problem. And so there's a few other things to be looking at. And one of them is, and I've mentioned this before, and this applies in other arenas, not just being a lawyer or being a judge. I've mentioned before that there are rules about how lawyers behave and how judges are supposed to behave. And the rules say that you should avoid the appearance of impropriety. And I think that's something that most people should be aware of, whether or not you have a job that requires a code of ethics for your behavior or not. You should always be aware of, how does this look? So if you're at a job and you're going to do something that's a little bit outside the rules, you should ask yourself, what does this look like to other people? And is that going to be a problem? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you need to live your life to make everyone else happy. I'm not. And if you are doing something that's completely right and above board and someone comes by and goes, I don't like what you're doing, you have the right to go, too bad. You do. But if you are in a job and you are working and being paid and you take the job seriously and you decide to do something a little bit outside of the typical guidelines that's going to look bad, you should be aware of it and ask yourself, should I be doing this? And so let's assume that his story is completely true. That is, they had 11 lawnmowers, and let's assume they were all junk. 11 junk lawnmowers. And let's assume that he somehow knows this because he oversees something to do with this, okay? So he thinks to himself, well, we should get new lawnmowers. New lawnmowers are going to cost money, though, and schools are always tight with their budgets. What can we do to offset that cost? Oh, let's sell the old lawnmowers because they have some value left and use that to defray the cost of the new lawnmowers. Okay, that concept actually sounds like it could make sense, except that there's probably a framework that says, here's how you sell old ones, here's how you buy new ones. And so for him to put them on Facebook Marketplace instantly creates a problem. When you go on Facebook Marketplace, and I've talked about this recently, if I go to sell you something, okay, I go to sell you something. What's it going to be today? I go to sell you this little guy who goes on your keychain. And I say, I want to sell this to you. You go, I want to buy that from you. And I say, $5. And you say, I'm willing to pay $5. You hand me $5, I hand you the little bucky. He's yours now. That transaction is something that children understand. Except most children don't think about it in the terms of, I'm giving you a warranty. It's a warranty of title. I own it. This right here is mine. And when I sell it to you, it becomes yours. The only way I can sell it to you is if I own it. Okay? So warranty of title means I have the right to sell it to you. I am the owner of it. I transfer good title to you. We're not talking about the title you get with your car, certificate of title. We're talking about the legal concept of ownership. This right here is mine. There's no paperwork that says that, but I can prove it to you because I can tell you about how I bought it. It's been on my shelf. I'm in possession of it. I own it. It's mine. I can sell it to you now. It's yours. Guess what? 11 lawnmowers that belong to school district. Can that man sell them? Does he have the legal authority to do that? Because he doesn't own them. And so for him to sell the lawnmowers that are not his, he must have the legal authority to do that. And so when someone contacts him on Facebook Marketplace and goes, I want to buy that lawnmower of yours, and he says, I want to sell you the lawnmower, does he really say, it's not mine, it's the school's? And the question is, what would give him authority to sell someone else's lawnmower? That's a problem. So there is actually a legal issue there as well. I don't know if the school district is going to run around and try to find the 11 buyers and get their lawnmowers back, but I'd be curious to see what they sold for. And I'd also be curious to see, and this is something that's not in the story, unfortunately, is how the school district found out. Because the guy walked into a meeting one day and put $1,100 in the counter and said, guys, I just sold our lawnmowers for $1,100. Things were only worth $500. I made us a bunch of money. We can now go buy some better lawnmowers. I'm making up numbers here for illustrative purposes, okay? So the point is, when did he tell them? And that's another thing to think about. I mentioned before the appearance of impropriety. When you do something that you don't tell other people about and they find out about it, it often indicates that you're doing something that's not good. Because otherwise, you would announce what you're doing. Hey guys, I'm going to go sell those lawnmowers, raise some money, we can go buy some new ones. And if you tell them that before you do it, they have the ability to say, don't do that, that's not how we do that. Or they can say, go ahead and do that. And then you're in the clear. But by not asking, not announcing, that's a problem, if that's what happened. And I think that is what happened based on what I'm reading between the lines here. The real question is, how did they find out? And if they found out after the fact, why didn't he tell them before the fact? So that's the problem. So he's currently suspended. They're saying they might fire him. They're going to have another meeting about that. But as of right now, like I said, it's one of these stories that really makes you go, what? Administrator suspended after selling school district lawnmowers on Facebook Marketplace. And he sold them one at a time. That's 11 successful transactions on Facebook Marketplace. If nothing else, that's remarkable. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. The things that come to those who wait are usually the things left by those who got there first.